Okay, so good morning, everybody, and thank you ever so much for attending what's going to be a fabulous session led by Lata, who I will hand over to in a moment. So I'm Sarah Hills. I'm the business owner of CUPE International, an accredited training organisation. And actually CUPE, been around a while, but actually stands for Change Under Projects Environments, which not a lot of people know. And I'm very passionate about change, spend a lot of my time delivering the accredited change management course as well myself. So some of you may know me from that. So like I say, it's not about me today though, it's about the wonderful Lata Hamilton, and she's going to be presenting how she won a Change Award. Ultimately, that's how our paths have crossed. So absolutely fantastic that Lata won the Change Award, which we'll talk about more in a moment as well. But going to be presenting on From Silo to Shared Vision, Empowering Change Leadership During Multinational ERP Transformations. I mean, doesn't that just sound exciting? And what's brilliant about these masterclasses is so many people ask me all the time, actually, what did people do? So this is an opportunity to learn from those out there doing it, those that are really making a difference and understand actually what it is they're doing to make that difference. So just a couple of the sponsors of the Change Awards. We have ourselves, CUPE International, Investigo, Grace. So a couple of the sponsors there. And here are some of the upcoming change talks as well. So we've also got coming up on the 25th of November, From Silos to Synergy, Transforming Public Sector Culture Through Collaboration. And that's the Department for Business and Trade. On the 26th, we've got From Proxy to Partnership, How Change and Project Collaboration Turned the Tide on ERP Implementation, and that's the Alliance Group Limited. And then Leading Beyond Yourself, Designing Organisations that Thrive Through Change, and that's Anne Mariah at the Passetta's Leadership Centre. You may have not had the opportunity to watch some of the ones that have passed that have been brilliant as well, so you can catch up some of those on demand. So modernising the coldest workplace on earth, the British Antarctic Survey, hidden ROI of culture from acquisition to alignment, from Differentis, construction to culture, how Translink built a future-ready transport hub and future-ready workforce, and using lean change to build future-ready change capability. So again, if you've missed any, you can absolutely catch up and stay tuned for the ones that are coming up in the future. So, like I say, I am going to hand over now to the wonderful Lata Hamilton, who is going to talk us through exactly what she did to move from that silos. So, Lata, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And please, if you can pop into the chat, maybe your name and the city or country that you're joining from, that would be absolutely amazing. I love seeing who we have on sessions that I'm leading as I bring up my slides. So it would be amazing if you could just pop your city and your name into the chat. And I'll bring up the chat as well.
Thank you for reminding me, Lata. So used to doing these things myself and completely forgot this time. Building on, like Lata says, your name and where you're from, because that's always wonderful to know. Any questions that you have, please pop into the chat as well. And at the end, there's going to be a Q&A session that Lata is more than happy to answer any of your questions. So please pop any questions throughout into the chat function, and then Margot, myself, will come to you at the end, and Lata will be happy to end us. Sorry to interrupt. Thank you for reminding me, Lata.
Yeah, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. Also, so we've got Kerry from Harrogate in the UK. We've got an iPhone, Jamoke from London. We've got Danny from London. So please, if you're just joining now, pop your name and your city and country into the chat. And if you can see my slides, pop a big yes into the chat. Always love to make sure that people can see what it is that I'm presenting. So if you can pop a big yes into the chat, that would be amazing. Fantastic. Okay, so let's get started then. So when I walked into the board meeting room, I was met with a handful of faces that I'd only ever seen on screen, and at that only once. The owner, the only one that I hadn't met yet, hadn't arrived, but we had an allocated slot, so decided to get started. It was the very start of the ERP transformation, and the project hadn't even really kicked off yet. So if you don't know what an ERP is, it stands for Enterprise Resource Platform. And the best way to describe it is it's like a single core system that covers end-to-end business processes. So it'll cover everything from like sales and marketing to customer relationship management to service and fulfillment to invoicing, financial reporting, and in this particular case with this manufacturing client, it also covered manufacturing and quoting modules, and also a mobile application for on-the-road service technicians. So that was kind of being built in as a sort of bolt-on application to this ERP. So really big, like ERPs are really big digital transformations because they often touch every single part of the business. And so I knew that running this future state workshop was critical in setting the change up for success for this medium-sized, privately owned manufacturing company. And the company actually had staff and depots all across Australia, and manufacturing facilities, offices, and customers in the Philippines as well. And so to start off this future state workshop that I was running for the board, I started by sharing how high level what change management is, what organizational change management is. And I kind of just explained that I wanted to level set everybody and share specifically how it was that I led change and why it's a little bit different to the norm. And then we went straight into it. So by this time, the owner actually had arrived, and he was a salt of the earth, no frills baby boomer who'd probably been in business longer than I'd probably been alive. And so with his arms folded at the opposite head of the table to me, like I'm at the front, at the head of the table, and he's at like the other end, and I was standing up. He was very like closed and gruff, sort of like unsure why we were about to waste 2 hours of a bright sunny Wednesday with this curly-haired millennial consultant. And so even though it was the first time that I was combining my benefits mapping approach and my vision setting approach together into the one workshop, I knew from experience that it was powerful and would align this board leadership group around the commitment and plan for their ERP transformation. So we started with the benefits mapping, and I explained the process. Then each person reluctantly went around the room answering while I popped their responses up onto a whiteboard at the front of the room. And so we kept going around the room in circles, and slowly but surely the momentum built, the energy shifted, the mood changed, and the room felt different. And when it came time for the owner's next turn, he landed on what specifically it was that gave him a reason to be in business, his reason to be in business. And it came down to his employees and improving the lives of those people who worked for him. And there were tears in his eyes because we had connected with something deeper. And this wasn't just a business transformation anymore. It was a personal transformation. And I did my magic trick, playing back all of their responses, and it landed for every single person in the room. Aligned, they got it. And that's the foundation on which we built the change strategy and plan. And by this stage in the board meeting, we'd already hit the 2-hour mark that we'd been allocated, but the owner had actually secretly and surprisingly ordered pizzas and salads with his executive assistant, and we carried on through the vision setting component and then the wrap up of this future state workshop so that I could go away and craft the change brand, the theme, the narrative, and the key messages. Because the truth about change is that it's less of a science and more of an art. It's less about mind and more about heart. So if you haven't ever come to any of my sessions, if you haven't seen me on LinkedIn, I'll take a little bit of time to just introduce myself, what I do. So my name is Lata Hamilton. I'm the founder and CEO of Passion Pioneers, the author of Pioneer Your Career Change, and also the creator of the Leading Successful Change program. So I live in sunny Sydney, Australia. Not so sunny at the moment because it's nighttime here for many of you. I can see you in the UK. A few fast facts. I'm an absolute foodie, absolutely love food, love cooking it, love eating it, love going to foodie adventures and restaurants and trying new things. I'm also a cardio junkie, so I love running, swimming, English country dancing. So I do Regency balls and festivals, and yoga as well. And I'm also an avid thrift shopper, so even the top that I'm wearing is a recycled treasure. And I help leaders carve their own paths for change when they're going through really difficult changes, really difficult transformations. And I help them to find their feet and find their future, and to really lead that change with confidence. And so I've worked on a lot of different types of changes. I've worked on big changes, big transformations that have impacted over 100,000 people. I've worked on operating model changes that have impacted over 10,000 people. I've worked on global cultural transformations that have straddled continents. And then my favorite thing to work on is digital transformation that's changing the way that we work. And as Sarah mentioned, earlier this year, I won the Change Award for Best Independent Consultant because I have my own independent consultancy, which is called Passion Pioneers. So Passion Pioneers is Sydney-based, but I do work interstate and international with my clients. And so what do I do? So you would probably know, I mean, we're all kind of in change, right? So you'd probably know all about change management. I'm not going to go through that. You can read it on the slide. But maybe you don't know sort of the other thing that I build into everything that I do, no matter what it is that I'm creating or offering, or the clients that I'm working with, or the work that I'm delivering for those clients, what I also bring in. And that's neurolinguistic programming and coaching. So if you haven't heard of NLP before, it's easier to say NLP than neurolinguistic programming, which is a bit of a mouthful. It's the study of excellence in behavior, communications, and psychology, or our emotions. And so I'm always bringing and blending these two things together, no matter what I do. So I blend these in my change management training, my retreats, my change consulting. And my flagship program is Leading Successful Change. And I also have my flagship retreat, which is the Instant Change Consultant Retreat. So what was it that we were actually doing? So in early 2022, I was engaged by this national manufacturing client with Philippines-based support and manufacturing teams. And they were implementing this enterprise resource platform. And then what was the issues or challenges that they were experiencing in the organization was that this organization had been around for a few decades and had been really successful. Like, they were a real leader in their field. But they had aged and disconnected technology architecture that was impacting their service and support. And what does happen with a lot of these, old softwares, old technologies, is that they're no longer supported anymore. And so, bits and pieces of it break. Sometimes they've been, crafted and added on and bolted on until they're sort of almost like a Frankenstein type style system. But they're so aged and disconnected that they actually start impacting the ability to be able to deliver to customers, and also to attract new customers into the business. They were also operating with a very siloed business model with different processes and culture for their offshore country region. So there was a real sort of split between sort of the Australia teams and the Philippines teams, despite the fact that they actually worked relatively closely together, but they really saw themselves as really different teams. And then there is a bit of a difference sometimes between that Western culture and some of those more Asian cultures, and how to approach that and how to lead and address those things with people. They had no change management capability, but even more than that, this was actually the first major transformation that they would have had in decades, and it was a really long tenured workforce. So there were people there who had been there for decades, and they'd never ever experienced not even just like a new system, like a new technology, like they hadn't experienced any major projects, major transformations at all. So it was all very new and very fresh, and the scale and size of the change was very overwhelming for a lot of people. And so what we were really focusing on was these new and effective, efficient ways of working that would be enabled by this new enterprise resource platform, ERP, that would lead to potential business growth, and then potentially down the track, like most likely operating model changes. I've worked on both digital transformations and operating model changes. And like, I think for me, it's like they do often go hand in hand, because the digital transformation changes the way that the business works and operates, their ways of working, their structures, their accountabilities, their reporting lines, their governance even sometimes. So it's a natural progression to do an operating model change sort of off the back of that. And so something that I'm really passionate about personally is actually like the future of work and how we really empower and support teams through those types of changes where their roles are being impacted. Because, if we know when it comes to things like automation, artificial intelligence, so many roles, like the sheer volume of roles is going to be impacted. And leaders don't have the answers, and people can't do it for themselves. So we really need to start empowering them around this. So the risks that we sort of faced was obviously the job loss fears due to simplification and automation. So there wasn't AI built into this particular enterprise resource platform, but it was a lot of automation. And I would probably hazard a guess to say that a lot of things that are touted as AI currently being implemented are actually really just automation in disguise, like kind of like shined up to look like AI, but it's just a lot of automation. And automation's been around for a while now and been sort of on the cards for at least a good decade. The system being seen as the solution, so being touted as like the system is going to solve all of our problems, fix all of our woes, but not factoring in all of the things that happen around the system that need to happen in order for the system to actually be successful, which could include things like new ways of working, a shift in culture, responsibilities and capabilities to actually embed how processes, business processes and ways of working would change. Too much change too fast, and that being really overwhelming. That was probably one of the really big risks, and people were already starting to feel that even before I got there, and the project hadn't even kicked off yet. And then attachment to old systems and processes, which would lead to workarounds or customization rather than best practice. So taking from a global best practice provider, like vendor, taking that and actually using and harnessing it, actually creating another almost Frankenstein style system, and then not being able to get the customer outcomes that we were looking for. So the opportunity was to work our way down from the board to the boots on the ground, using empowering and practical tools to create a shared vision, alignment, ways of working and capability, and uplifting change maturity in every corner of the company. So I talk a lot about creating like an undercurrent of change acceptance. And I love the phrase like a rising tide lifts all boats. And if we think about change these days, it's not those peaks and troughs that we used to have, where, you had those quiet periods and change was really, that like was few and far between. And then there was sort of like a big peak of change and then sort of like a lull and then another big peak of change. Now change is coming so fast and so furiously that it's so constant that we really need to actually create an undercurrent of change acceptance. And this organization didn't have any even inkling of that because they'd never gone through any major change before, maybe like tiny little kind of updates or upgrades, but nothing major at all. So that was one of the big opportunities, was to actually shift the way that they thought about change and start to create that foundation, that base, and lift that rising tide so that those peaks and troughs are sort of smoothed out. And then that would pave the way for future changes that might have needed to happen. So this particular enterprise resource platform was very much seen as like the enabler for other things that needed to come along the way, but couldn't be done until this was in place. So we wanted to do that by creating a vision, experience-focused narrative and theme. So not just implementing, not just doing a system implementation, not just doing a system upgrade and really focusing on the technical. The real, the secret sauce and the magic really came from actually building in that total experience for employees. We were enabling new ways of working to align to that ERP and making sure that people were ready and going to actually be able to get the business success off the back of the technology implementation. And then another big part was actually doing capability with the team. So empowering them with things like insights generation capability and business partnering capability. Because as technology, whether it's automation, AI, starts to take away some of the more administrative or repetitive tasks and functions, that actually frees employees up to be able to do some more of the strategic relationship, people-focused aspects of their role, or some of the more creative and complex aspects of their role, but not everybody actually has the capability to do that. Often they're so bogged down in the day-to-day admin that they've never even had the opportunity to even think beyond, just pushing out everything that they needed to do each day. So here are the 7 things that I did as part of this particular piece of client work. So I ran the Future State workshop with the board, which I just explained. I advocated for a business-focused project manager resource. I mapped the organizational matrix and how people actually worked, not what the reporting lines were. I led the business unit level engagement. I drove customer communications and strategy. and the strategy, and then actually the delivery of those communications as well. And then I coach the comms and training leads on how to do the change delivery. And then I developed a feedback culture. So we're going to go through each one of these, and I'll sort of share a little bit about what I did, in each one. So I ran the future state workshop with the board. This was literally the very first thing that I did. And like I mentioned, I'd only ever really done benefits mapping and vision setting separately in like workshops. Like, I done it with like project leaders and executive teams before, but it had always been just like one aspect of it. So like once I ran like a supply chain leadership, like the leadership team of a supply chain business. And like I just did the vision setting only as part of that. And that was like a 2-hour workshop in and of itself. But they do really, what I'd say is they do really work well in the same workshop. So I actually do this for all of my clients now and combine it into this kind of single future state workshop because they flow so well into each other. So before the workshop, I met with each of the board members, and my client was on those sessions too individually. So we just did catch-ups on Teams individually with each board member, so that I kind of had a bit of an inkling as to what people thought were the challenges and the opportunities from a personal perspective and from their particular where they were sitting from and what they were thinking about. Then we secured the 2 hours on the board meeting, but it actually took 3 hours. So lesson learned. Now I would, generally tend to put in at least 3 hours, maybe even 4, knowing how long it can take and getting the commitment to carve that time out. We took them through the change management overview, the benefits mapping and the vision setting. And then I kind of explained to them, I'm like, great, all of the outputs from this is going to drive your change brand, theme, narrative, key messages, and balanced business scorecard, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And so you can see here the key benefits, like the key change benefits that came out of that workshop. With the big focus was effective ways of working. And so it was big picture, real-time data, a seamless experience, develop our people, and a trust culture. You might notice that none of the benefits relate to time, none of the benefits relate to money, none of the benefits relate to sales. All of the change benefits relate to how we're going to be improving the experience of people, whether that is employees within the company or customers as well. And so then alongside the new ERP being designed and built, I co-created and co-designed the change strategy and the plan, hitting on all of the areas of change, comms, training, business readiness, and sort of created this sort of like year-long integrated program of using the change strategy and the narrative of digital enablement for channels of growth. So even though the outcome was really focused on customer growth, and that was that formed part of the tagline for this particular change, I guess a lot of the change activity was really geared around that experience factor. The second thing, because I was brought so early on in the project, there actually wasn't a project manager on the project. And I guess if I was reflecting, like when I was a contractor, I'd often be on projects, and if there was no formal project manager whose role and experience and expertise was project management, they'd often just grab like a person from the business who might be like, a HR specialist or something like that, and kind of give them the hat of project management, even though they don't really have the skill set and often even the capacity, because they're often still doing a BAU role as well. So that's kind of what used to happen. But what I also find, because I work with a lot of medium-sized consulting clients, is that a lot of clients are actually missing the project manager completely altogether. And I've discovered that where it comes from is that the technology vendors that they're working with, they spout that they've got this global best practice system, this solution. They spout that they're going to run it all and like they're going to build it all, and that they're just going to be able to just drop it into the organization and switch it on, and everybody's going to be really happy because it's going to be so intuitive, it's going to work so well, everybody's going to be on board, and like you don't need a project manager on the client side to do any of the work. But the thing is that what they're really talking about, and on big programs that I've worked on from the very first moment I started in change, there's 2 types of project managers or program managers. There's the business focused project or program manager. And then there is the technical project manager, whose job it is to get the technology built and ready, developed, built and ready. And the business project manager actually has like a really critical role, like regardless of what the technical project manager is doing. So the technology vendor will often be covering that technical side, but they're not covering the business side, and so it ends up being a real gap. And that shiny object syndrome kind of like comes in, and the clients just they believe it. They're like, oh great, we're going to save all this money by not having a project manager, but it really starts to fall over because business engagement is like the biggest opportunity, and it's often not about the outcome. So for example, like if a business project manager is trying to work with stakeholders to gather requirements, it's not actually about the outcome. It's not about having written requirements from the business. It's actually about the connection, the collaboration, the conversation, the trust that's built, the two-way like feedback that's built, and taking people on a journey. And so if you don't have that business-focused project manager, you're missing that. You're missing that opportunity to engage the business along the way. And while change will engage the business sort of more from like how they're going to receive and use and adopt whatever it is that you're launching, like the work still needs to happen on sort of like the more on the system side of things, which is really where the business project manager needs to play a role. So for me, I really advocated for them to actually hire a business project manager. And what I would just say is like, choose your resources really well. Make sure that you're really choosing a good business focused PM, not somebody who maybe just follows the methodology, follows the tick the box kind of checklist, but actually like their core skill set is stakeholder engagement, because technical PMs, like often they're really good at getting the stuff done, but the business side is missing. Then I also mapped the organizational matrix. I sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier, where I did a big review of all of the existing business structure and the teams that sat within that business structure. And the reporting lines kind of went like that, but who actually worked with who in the organization actually went like that. And like completely like crossed over and was so matrixed. And so I sort of designed and showcased this like visual view of how the teams actually work together. And I think it was the first time that anybody had ever really articulated that for them. Like they didn't realize that that's why it always felt so clunky, and that's why they were always waiting on this team and doing this, because the reporting lines and the actual ways of working did not match up, but could potentially be resolved and fixed by this transformation. So I ran business stakeholder engagement at all levels, from board and executive to business leaders and team members, and that this fed into the change impact assessment, risk assessment, stakeholder analysis. And I did the whole business as a whole, and then I kind of went and dived into sort of each of the business areas. And so I mapped all of the businesses, including all of the service line matrices, and then I mapped all of the employees to a business function rather than to their reporting line. So the idea was around getting that cross-divisional engagement, collaboration, and development. And there were times when like the same person was in the same role, maybe across country or maybe across a team, and they had never even really met before. So sort of like playing that matchmaker to sort of start getting people thinking about their role as a function. So it could be like the sales function, the marketing function, the service function, rather than this is the reporting line and this is the country lead that I report to. And obviously then that was starting to seed potentially some organizational design changes in operating model and structure down the track. So one of my core deliverables was leading the business unit level engagement, because this was a bit of a gap. Like there was a bit of a gap in terms of just general managerial capability and leadership. So I packaged and themed the change into an organization-wide program and communications to start to reduce those silos and those cultural differences. And then I led this business unit engagement and facilitated business-wide town halls by function. So for the first time, for some people, they were sitting on a session with their counterparts for the first time ever. And it was simply because we ran the town halls by function rather than by business leader. And that's also seeded new ways of working, because we could focus on what it would be for that particular function specifically. I do often see that too much focus is put on boards, executives, and sponsors, and we sort of often forget about the other layers and levels in the organization. And I always talk about sort of top-down, leader-led, and grassroots, bottom-up, and then the magic happens in the middle. So led those, and also led the uplift of leadership capability for business unit managers. So to do this, I did business unit manager briefings, which I seeded. Again, I kind of like, instead of doing it separately, I kind of seeded in this leadership capability. Every time I met with them, I gave them an extra piece of capability to help them on, here's how to cascade communications well, and here's how to, open things up for feedback to your teams and things. I provided team cascade packs. I created weekly business unit manager update emails and coached and advised on like project portal and regular communication updates for the leaders and the teams. And so this was brand new lines of communication engagement that had never happened before. Like a lot of these business unit managers had never really, again, sat on sessions before, even though they're sort of at the same level across the organization. And then because capability was such a big thing, I also designed and delivered a team accountability coaching program. So starting to teach them, because in any transformation, but particularly when it comes to operating model transformations, one of the biggest challenges is the ability to have difficult conversations, is the ability to have courageous conversations. And so rather than wait until an operating model is coming, it's like if you can start building that muscle, building that capability, building that skill with business leaders or with line managers earlier rather than later, then it means that when the time comes where they do need to have a difficult conversation or a courageous conversation, they've already started to build that skill set and have that comfort level. And then I also provided like a vision setting template. So we did the overarching vision, the group vision with the board, and then that filtered down. But remember how I talked about the grassroots bottom up? So I also created a vision setting template that leaders could take to their team and then help their team set a vision, and also the individuals within the team. And this is what I actually call the engagement formula, where you kind of have a group vision and then you have the individual vision, and the two kind of align in some cases, but also have variance too. And then the last tool that I loved was kind of like a spot the difference tool that I developed. And it was kind of like, like back in primary school or whatever, how you would like have the two pictures and it would be like the dog's missing a tail, and you've got to like circle like the things that are different between the two pictures. So I kind of like created this tool where teams could articulate for themselves what's going to be different between the current process and the new process. Because remember, we were missing the project manager at the start. And so a lot of that work hadn't been done as to like what the current and future processes would actually be. So sort of, again, starting to empower the teams to understand for themselves what it's going to mean for them. And then they could play that back to me. So there was a bit of a selfish element in that, I will admit. And Danielle says, totally agree with top-down, leader-led and grassroots bottom-up. And that's so too often the focus is put on the board, executive and sponsor. But what if it's driven by them? So yeah, we'll get to that question towards the end. So then I also drove the customer communication strategy. So my background is actually marketing. I love customer, and everything I do, no matter what project I'm working on, no matter what company I'm working for or client I'm working with, I'm always focusing on the customer. And actually the very first change that I ever worked on was a new product development that went literally out into the market. So for me, like no matter what change it is, like customer experience is always the goal. And often if you actually do the math, the number of customers far exceeds the number of internal staff. And this is often amplified if the customer's going to use the system too. So you might have 500 internal staff, but you might have thousands of customers who might have a customer module part, like customer facing module part, which they need to get on board the change too. So like with all my clients, I'm always making sure that this part is covered, and I love doing it. So I often put my hand up to do it. And so I pulled together a full program of customer communications from announcement of the change right through to go live, and even drafting the emergency comms, just to make sure that there was that seamless and smooth transition for customers as well as for staff internally. And then I coached the comms and training leads. So within the business, a couple of people were selected to be communications leads and training leads. So they did the delivery of the comms and training, but because they didn't really have necessarily experience in it, I did a lot of work actually coaching them in how to do that role and helping them to workshop. And the reason why is because the way that I work with my consulting clients is that I love building capability. Like I want to leave as much capability in the organization as I can. And I want to showcase what best practice change looks like, but then build their skills internally so that they can lead changes for themselves on their own in the future. And then if they need my help with something that's maybe more complex or something that's more, a bigger scale or something more out of the box, then they can, bring me back if they need to. So I led the change, but also provided the coaching to the BAU and project resources who were playing these roles. And then the comms was led by an internal middle manager. So I sort of did briefings and feedback on how to do her role. And then the technical training of how to use the system was actually delivered by the vendor. But the training lead, I sort of gave her extra coaching on strategy, training needs analysis, how to do that, and did that with her. The plan, success measures, schedule, readiness tools, like we had like a checklist per person and things like that. And so it led to a 75% plus completion attendance rate for training. And yeah, like the training actually was really well formed and really well formulated. And then the delivery was actually done by the vendor. And then I also helped the project figure out their work breakdown and capacity, and the training lead to do that for herself too. And then lastly, I developed a feedback culture. So I did an initial catch up with HR to understand their people strategy, where to align their support, what it is that they were trying to achieve, what key initiatives they had, what they wanted to do. One of the big things was that no engagement surveys existed in the business. They just never been done. And you do sometimes find this with medium-sized organizations, like they've built up over time and they've grown quite fast sometimes, or they've been around a long time when engagement surveys weren't a thing and like nobody's brought them in or been successful in bringing them in. So I used the change to actually seed quarterly pulse checks, and then sort of built those. We did those quarterly so it would build that longer term behavior, so that when the time came that HR wanted to actually implement an engagement survey with all employees, they would already have built that familiarity and that comfort level with surveys. So I will maybe just stop here. I mean, I've talked about a lot and I'm kind of going to go a bit more into the tools moving forward. So if you've got any questions, maybe just pop them in the chat and we'll get to those at the end, because I have left time for questions on this session too. And if this is interesting, please pop into the chat if this is interesting. And so because not all of you would be independent consultants who work with your own clients necessarily, I thought I'd kind of share a little bit about like what was it that the client, like that actually formed my statement of work with the client. So the overall service that I delivered was this change premium package. So it's kind of like a base premium package where they get like the strategy, the plan, and the delivery. And then I give the value adds that are specific to the project. So for this particular client, the value adds were the future state workshop was a value add, the business unit manager engagement was a value add, the customer communications engagement was a value add, attending project meetings, and like actually going to those things were all was like billed kind of like hourly. I ran a governance workshop to help with the lines of reporting and lines of authority, which didn't necessarily sit in my camp, but they needed somebody to run it. And so I ran that for them. And then the coaching of the training lead. So these were kind of like the extra things over and above what would normally sit in sort of like just the standard change package that I would offer. And then I did the business readiness checks just as part of the standard change package. I supported the IT steering committee with updates and progress on the people experience and project change performance. And then I just met with my client regularly to check in, review progress, and agree any changes in our focus, in our scope, discuss any challenges and solutions. And I always talk about, when I'm sort of teaching and sharing how to be an independent consultant, I'm always talking about being that trusted change advisor. So like you have this relationship with your client, and sometimes you might have more than one, in inverted commas, client in the organization. Sometimes it might be the CEO, sometimes it might be the general manager, sometimes it might be the head of IT, or it might be the head of IT and the general manager, and they're both your clients. So you're sort of working with them both, and you're their trusted sort of change advisor, and often you're actually their trusted business advisor. You're helping them, and often they'll disclose and share with you things about the business performance and about the business goals and the business strategy. And so, like it's a really powerful relationship to have, and a really rewarding relationship to have with clients. So this is the results. So the organizational change maturity overall rose from about a 3 out of 10 from the rating from my client to about a 7 out of 10. And then the change confidence rose from a 2 out of 10 to sort of like a high 6 to 7 out of 10. And it probably would have been higher, but at that time, the actual technology implementation side, not the change side. The change side was, absolutely running fast ahead. Like we were absolutely on track, and everything was going really well. But from the technology implementation side, it was stalled. So when I was doing this, post-review, satisfaction review with my client, there was a little bit of that sort of sitting at the back of their mind. And so, they wanted that to be a bit higher, but because of some of the delays, they sort of got a bit stuck as to, we're only here. And so then I ran the business handover and the embedding, and sort of I ended up moving away from that client simply because they were stalled on their project. But the learnings that I sort of came up with the client would be to provide training on end-to-end change delivery for all the project team members. And the easiest way to do that would have just been put them onto my Leading Successful Change program, and then they just learn end-to-end change delivery, because it was like a lot of work trying to get, say, for example, comms leads and training leads, and then the person who was sort of doing the business readiness or supporting me with business readiness, because I was trying to teach capability. It was just hard to sort of do that along the way while you're also trying to deliver as well. And that would have given me probably a bit more opportunity to just focus on coaching and advisory, and I would also recommend, and like what we kind of came up with, is really seeking the best available resources for the work. This is always this tension with clients and projects around, cost and quality. And, sometimes when they're pulling somebody in from BAU that doesn't have the capacity, but also sometimes doesn't have the capability, and they might not know whether they have the capacity to actually be able to absorb it and learn these new skills. So sometimes we have to make that balance, and you can absolutely advise your clients or advise your projects on what you think would be appropriate. And if a particular person is not working, like you can maybe suggest, I think it's time we do bring in somebody who's a specialist in that skill set. And then my personal one, so this didn't come from the client, this is more a personal one. I would add that to do executive coaching with like the leaders, so whether that's the board, whether that's the executive, whether that's the sponsor, to actually do executive coaching and have them start to think beyond the transformation and start to think about like their own career, their own purpose, their own values, their own goals, their own vision. Because so much of the time changes, especially in medium-sized organizations, because I've worked with several now, and they get stalled because the very same people, which kind of goes a little bit to your comment/question, Danielle, the very same people who are signing off and driving and signing off these transformations are the very same people who stall them. And I'm not just talking about this, just like this client, like I'm talking about so many of my medium-sized organization clients this happens to. It's a real like challenge and a real trend. And I think that really comes down to not having that inner idea of what they're here to do and like their purpose and their value in their career, to then be able to take the pressure off and not be a bottleneck or a gatekeeper or a roadblock to the transformation. That the entire business, like often the people who are the boots on the ground are the ones that are like crying out and screaming out for these transformations, because they're the ones that they can see all of the value on. But the risks and the challenges that go up the line because of shifts in power, responsibility, reporting, potentially the number of employees that people have and things like that, that's where it starts to get bottlenecked as it goes back up the line. So something to really be mindful of and think about. So if I was going to leave you with a top tip, it would be engage hearts and minds from the outset. And I'm going to just spend you can take screenshots of the next few slides, but I'm going to share some of the tools that I share. Oh, but I've got a corn. I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing this right. Great projects and learnings.
I'll come to that after, Lata, the questions. You carry on and show you your little visuals for your top tips and what you use.
Yeah. And what I would really say is if you want to set yourselves apart from AI, and AI in change management, it's actually doing this side of the change. It's doing the engagement of hearts and minds and doing it from the very start, because you end up with such better traction that, yeah, it's just really fantastic to actually start from this strong foundation. So I always kind of do these three things, and that's how I kind of start the change. So it's the benefits mapping, the vision setting, and then the balanced business scorecard. And that's what really makes your change magic. So the benefits mapping, just from a time perspective, I'm probably not going to go too deeply into this, but I do teach this in my course and things like that. So if you want to come back to me and find out more about it and like all the information about how to do it, just get in touch with me. But basically, it's based on this neurolinguistic programming premise that the higher up you are chunked, so the higher level information is or an idea is, the more agreement that you get. And so then the lower level that something is, the lower level chunk, the more detailed, the more specific, the more disagreement or variance of opinion or preference that you'll get. So we can chunk up by asking, what is this an example of, for what purpose? These are sort of two questions that we can use to chunk up, or what's the highest intention of that? So I tend to use for what purpose and what's the highest intention of that. Then to chunk down into the detail, into individuality, we ask, what's an example of this? And a really good example of this is, like my house, like I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in the middle of Sydney, CBD. It's got 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a beautiful garden terrace. The building has a pool, gym, spa, sauna, 24/7 concierge, and I love it. So that's my house, right? But you might hate the idea of that completely, because you might be like, no, like I've got a dog and kids and I really need like a beautiful backyard for them to scream and laugh and play around in. Or you might be like, no, I really love to live, in the countryside, completely surrounded by bush or forest. So we have variances of opinion around like what place we would love to live in. But if we were to chunk up and we were to ask, like, for what purpose is a house? For what purpose is this? For what purpose is that? We could potentially go, for what purpose is a house? It's to have, a place to live and to be part of a community. For what purpose is a community? To, be part of a bigger nation or country. For what purpose is that? To be part of the world. For what purpose is that? To be part of the universe, because we're all in the universe together. And like, we can all agree that being in the universe is a pretty cool place to be, and that and that there isn't maybe like another universe that we would want to be in. Like we can all agree that it's a pretty cool universe to be in, because we've chunked so high level that there's no room anymore for disagreement, unless you believe in multiverses, which I think I do, but we'll get to that at some scientific stage. So that's the concept, right? And so the way that I've done this, like practically with stakeholders, like project stakeholders, is like I was once working on this project, and the project manager was a person from finance, and so they were like, they had this suite of systems, and they were like, we want this financial reporting, like the benefit that we're going to get off this, of all the systems, is financial reporting. And I'm like, nobody is going to care about that. That's going to actually probably break trust more than build trust, because people are just going to be like, you only care about the money. And so I just kept asking her, for what purpose, what's the highest intention of that? And we ended up getting to the point where we came up with this Make It Count, and that was the name of the program, empowering better decision making for our community, every dollar, every asset, every person, every decision. And like, if you had to sort of like guess like which one resonates more, like financial reporting or Make It Count, empowering better decision making for our community. And, it's obviously the second one. And that's actually the same way that we came up with the key benefits, the key change benefits for this ERP transformation. So super, super cool tool. Take a screenshot. I use it all the time. And it's just really, really handy tool. If you can nail chunking up, you can nail so many problems and challenges that you experience with stakeholders. Second tool, I'm not going to go through this, but just take a screenshot again, is vision setting. So, I set visions sort of more from a coaching perspective. And the ones that I would just really point out is what are we going to see, what are we going to hear, and what are we going to feel? Because that is what absolutely shifts and transforms the way that people experience that vision. And it's less about sort of like the business case and more about like what is the experience that people are going to have, you know, customers, community, employees, staff, but also the project team, the sponsor, the people who are the ones involved on the change as well, on the project as well. And then lastly, the business scorecard. So it's like a balanced scorecard for business benefits. And so from the work that you do, benefits mapping and the vision setting, I then sort of develop, and because in the vision setting, I'll often say, you know, like, how are we going to know? How are we going to measure that? And so then you can kind of come up with, and these can change, these headings of these kind of 3 areas, but you want to try and balance this scorecard. You don't want it to be only about business operations or only about finance or only about sales and growth. And you don't want it to only be about people either. You know, like change management is a balance of people and results. And so I'll often have one that says customer and I'll often have one that says people. And then this one is often like balanced to whatever is relevant for that particular business. And then that gives you really clear metrics as to how you're going to track and measure success for that change. So yeah, take a screenshot of that one as well. Cool. So wrapping up now. So I hope you've, if you've got any questions, do pop them in the chat. But what I would say, if I'm going to give you a key takeaway, just remembering that go live is not success. Adoption is not success. Success is how we improve the experience of people, because that's what makes change magic. And if you'd like to connect with me over on LinkedIn, you can email me, lata.hamilton@passionpioneers.com.au, and you can find all the stuff that I have at my website, latahamilton.com. So if you want to pop questions in, and maybe I'll hand over to Sarah to guide us through Q&A.
Perfect. Well, thank you ever so much, Lata. And I have to say, everything you've talked about is very aligned of how I've led, you know, people in change for several decades. And, you know, it's really lovely to hear everything you've talked about. And I think actually we could work very closely together. And a couple of things there, like say, just the fact that, you know, you identified early on, but enabling those people you were working with to recognise actually it's not just business, it is personal, which is so key, because people, I don't know why, but over the years, they've tried to shy away from it being personal. And it's, we're talking about people at the end of the day. So very refreshing that, you know, we understand that. And also a common theme from all of you people that are leading the way, that are winning these awards, you're very much talking about, you're absolutely shifting the mindset in the organisations about change, which is, you know, what Margot is so passionate about, what we're all passionate about. So you're absolutely shifting that mindset and building that capability internally, which is brilliant. So wonderful. So a couple of questions. You did kind of give a bit of an answer to Danielle's, like you said, about the sponsors and so forth, but absolutely worth just going over it again. So Danielle was saying she totally agreed with the top-down, leader-led and grassroots bottom-up, and that so often too much focus is put on the board, executive sponsor, but what if it is driven by them? And like I said, you kind of alluded to a little bit about that, but if you'd like to have the opportunity to summarise your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, like I mentioned, like I really do think that it's about that executive coaching. I think that there's so much that's happening for them. Often it has very little to do with the actual transformation itself. And so having that sort of trusted person, whether it is, you know, the consultant who's come in or the change manager, or potentially hiring an external executive coach. So like, you know, I sometimes do executive coaching for people. And so it's like sometimes just having that person come in to help guide them alongside the transformation. It's like any of those challenges and bottlenecks you can almost alleviate by giving them a platform and a forum, like a private platform and forum, to work those things through. And it's not like as an executive coach, you would then report back to the client, you know, like, oh, they said this. But it's more about having that awareness, especially if you are the person working internally as well. It's like having that awareness. Okay, here's what we're trying to do within the project, within the change. Here's what they're struggling with at the moment. If I help them with what they're struggling with, then they're going to show up better with how they're going to lead the change. And so sometimes you don't even need to disclose what it is that you know, but you can start to seed and guide where things could be heading in order to help them feel more aligned and on board.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more, Lata, definitely. And we've got another question as well from Corn. Sorry if I am pronouncing that wrong. Great project and learnings. Lata, how long was the engagement? Did it go according to your plan, your timeline? And how many additional hours were you able to bill for value add? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and while we're just because I can see we're sort of almost coming up near time, so I'd also love for you to pop into the chat. What was your best thing from the session? So, something that you found interesting, insightful, or informative. Pop that into the chat because I'd love to be able to read out some of those before we jump off the session. So, the engagement was, I think originally it was like a year. It was like a year. So, I think I kind of started in, or maybe just a bit less, maybe about 9 months. So, I sort of started in April was when all the contracts and everything, service agreements got signed off, and then sort of more started sort of end of April, May. And then it was going to be launched in like February, but by February it hadn't gone. So I sort of stopped working with them, just did a little bit of handover and things like that. I probably stopped working with them sort of like the following sort of like March, April. And then those value adds were added along the way. So in those quarterly or I actually do it by phase, catch ups with the client. I'll sort of go like, how are we tracking against what the deliverables are? And sometimes it'll be like taking a deliverable that we had planned to do, like insights generation capability. We couldn't do that because we were still so far away from the technology implementation. So the focus was actually coaching the training lead, for example. So we swapped things out along the way. And so, yeah, and then extra value adds were added in, sort of like that governance workshop was just before Christmas. So I sort of saw that as like that was extra added on. So I was like, oh, that's my Christmas bonus because it's not something that I would have normally done. And it's not something that was part of the original scope. So, yeah, so different things were added along the way. But I really prefer to bill statement of work and then value add separately, as little as possible, bill by time. Really, only the project meeting hours was what I billed by time. So
Yeah.
yeah, if you want to pop into the chat, your favorite or best things, that would be great. So Danielle says, my favorite takeaway, the recognition that success is how we improve the experience of people. So often success is measured on adoption, but especially with AI, that people piece is so important. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. That's great. And for anybody else who wants to pop their best thing into the chat, that would be amazing too, because I love reading them. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you again, Lata. And like you say, I think we can all agree absolutely all about the people. If we don't get the people bit right, then everything else potentially isn't going to actually work around it. So great insights. And what I also loved about that, Lata, as well, is you've given some absolutely great techniques and tools for people to take away. And I think, you know, people would definitely be linking with you, and I'm sure they will want to know more about the programs that you deliver. So thank you ever so much.
You're welcome.
So Margot, back over to you, and thank you again for having me. It's always a pleasure. So thank you for having me this morning to host this wonderful session, have the opportunity to meet, because I think I actually was sponsoring the award, but to give Lata, but Lata being not with us in the UK, you sadly weren't with us to actually receive it, were you? Um, which makes sense as you're in Sydney. So it's been a really a big pleasure to actually get to meet you properly and to see the lovely award behind you as well, showcasing.
Yes.
Right. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lata. Thank you, Sarah. Fantastic session. I have actually learned quite a lot and very, very, very impressed with the way that you are leading your work and what you do at your consulting business. Congratulations again on winning the award. And I'll propose to close the call. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sarah. Good night, good morning,
Yeah.
good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are in the world.
Yeah, take care, everybody. Thank you again for joining.
Thanks. Bye bye bye.
Bye.